Hey everyone, it's Professor Nagel. We're working through Murach C Sharp. This is exercise 8-1, use an array and a list. I have the application open. If you don't, go ahead and do that now. And if you haven't done so yet, hit subscribe. It helps me out as much as I'm helping you by walking through these assignments. All right, step one, we already talked about. Open the invoice total app that's in your chapter 8 directory. And let's jump into the code. So F7. Alright, oh look, they give us a little comment, to do. This is step 2, declare two class variables. An array that holds up to 5 invoice totals. Okay, so we need an array that's going to hold the invoice totals. And if I look down here, okay, here's invoice total, it's a decimal. Alright, it's important that we make our array the same type. So, decimal, square brackets, because it's an array, and we're going to call this invoice totals equals new decimal, and it's going to hold 5 items. And then part 2 of step 2 is an index you can use to work with that array. So int, we'll say totals index equals 0. We're going to initialize that to 0. So these are class level variables, meaning that when btn calculate is clicked and this event handler runs, and when we hit this curly bracket here, all the variables inside of this method go away. These are going to remain and the values remain. Okay, and this 0 refers to where are we in our array. So if you picture an array like a series of variables like this is spot 0. Okay, this is where we're going to run btn calculate.click. Oh, that went away. And it's going to put that value into the first box of our array. And then we're going to increment that counter. We're going to do plus plus on this to start writing into the second box. And then if we run it again, we have our third box, fourth box, fifth box, and then like over here things explode. All right, but we're going to see that in a moment. That was step 2, what we just did there. Step 3, add code that adds the invoice total to the next element of the array each time the user clicks the calculate button. So after all this stuff, and we have the invoice total, we're going to add the invoice total to the array. So yeah, this autocomplete's working really well for us. Invoice totals at spot totals index is going to be equal to the invoice total. So invoice totals, plural, is my array. We're starting at spot 0, and we're going to take the invoice total that we just calculated and store it in that array. And then we need to take totals index and increment it by 1, so that we don't keep writing in spot 0 again and again and again. It writes in spot 0, then spot 1, then spot 2, etc., etc. That was step 3. Step 4 is add code that displays all the invoice totals in the array in a dialog when the user clicks the exit button. So this is where the user clicks the exit button. Oh, and here's our to-do. So first, declare a string called message, and that's going to be what we're showing to the user. So let's just jump right ahead and do messagebox.show message, and we can say like invoice totals summary. That's just, this invoice total summary is just the title of that message box. And we can even go a little bit further here, right? We can say if message is not equal to nothing, then we can show this message box, right? Because we don't want to show it if it's empty. All right, and now we actually have to build that message. And to do that, use a for each loop. So we can insert a snippet or Control KX. I'm using Visual C Sharp, and I want a for each. Okay, and I'm going to say for each decimal invoice total in invoice totals. This is the thing you're looping through, invoice totals, that's our array, and you're going to look at each thing in there. And usually your array is a plural, and the thing that you're looking at is the singular version of that plural. And we still need to give this the correct type. Remember, we're using decimals here. And here we say message, is it a plus? I think it's a plus. Plus equals invoice total to string as currency, and then put another new line on there so that they're not just next to each other, they're one on each line. And one more bit though, still in step 4. Within this loop, where I just wrote that, you should include an if statement so you only display totals if they're not equal to 0. So if invoice total is not equal to 0, we do this thing. And because this is a single statement, you do not need curly brackets around it. I'm going to put the curly brackets in and put our message in there. I'm a big fan of putting the curly brackets in anyhow, because if you add a second statement later, you have to add those brackets. All right, let's test this out. Save F5 to run it. 255, 375, 900. All right, now when we hit exit, it saves, and notice it's saving the invoice total, not the input, but what the output is. All right, and there's only 3 of them there because the next 2 are empty. So did not write those out to the screen. All right, so all of this was step 4. Step 5 was test it. We did that. Step 6 is test it again with more than 5 values. So that was value 1, 2, 3, 4. That's my 5th value. Oops, that's too big. And now my 6th value, please enter a valid total. That's a valid number. Like, why? That's not working. And then when you exit, it shows you that stuff. All right, so please enter a valid number for the subtotal. It's catching every error in here. And the error that's happening is our array can only hold 5 values, and we tried to put a 6th in there. This try block, it's huge, threw a index out of range exception. So let's catch that. We're going to catch index out of range exception. I like giving my exception that I catch a name, even if we don't use it. And it says modify the tray catch so it handles this specific exception. You know, we can say, oh, the index is out of range, but the user has no idea what that means. We're just going to say this application only handles 5 invoices. All right, if we want to get even fancier, instead of saying 5 invoices, I guess invoice should be lowercase, we can say invoice totals.length. Right, because if I go and change my, and I'm just doing some formatting here, if I go and change this, so now it handles 8, but I'm going to go the other way, I'm going to do 3. I don't need to come down here and change this value. All right, so I just changed that to 3. Let's go see what this looks like when it runs. My first invoice is $1. My second one's $2. My third one's $3. Now when I put my 4th invoice in, sorry, this application only handles 3 invoices. And there's the summary. All right, make sure we put that back to 5, because that's what the book wanted. But notice when you're testing, it's easier to come down. You know, I could have said, oh, let's test this with 23 invoices. It would have taken me a long time to get there. So for testing purposes, I dropped it down, and now I'll put it back to what the required value is. Okay, so catching the index out of range exception, the EX has the green squiggly because we defined it, but we never used it. That's perfectly fine. We can leave that. And that was step 6. Step 7 is to sort these, and we only need to sort it before we loop through and display it. And quite simple, we're just going to array.sort, call the sort method of the array class, and we're going to sort invoice totals. So now when I run this thing, and I'm going to put it all out of order, so I'm going to say 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9. When I hit exit, these are now sorted. All right, whereas previously this was the first, that was the second, that was the third. We just did step 8. 7 was sort it, and step 8 was to test it. But then sometimes you hit a step like step 9. Step 9 says, without changing any of the code, so leave this code, don't erase anything, right? Because we want to be able to grade this. Repeat steps 2 through 8, but use a list to hold the totals. And then we're going to add a second for each loop so that when you exit the application, it'll show the array and it'll show the list. So we're storing the value twice. Okay, so here we need a list. And we're going to define that this list is a decimal list. And I'm going to call it invoice list equals new list of decimal. And the great thing about a list is you don't have to tell the size. So here we said, oh, this is going to hold 5 things. A list, you don't need to worry about that. Okay, so I'm going to actually read through steps 2 through 8 again, just so we make sure that we get everything. So declare the variables. We don't need a counter for a list. We just need to declare the list. And then add the code. So we're going to do this right here. Invoice list dot add invoice total. This adds it to the end of the list. That was step 3. Step 4 is to show the dialog box. So that's this bit right here. So we're going to take, how do I want to do this? I'm going to just add some lines of comments like this. So you can see that this whole section here is the array. And actually we can say like okay, so we have all the code for the array, which is right here. And now we're going to put our code for the list right here. And a lot of it's similar. Like we're going to start with nothing. And then, oops, we don't need to define it though. And then we're going to say if the message is nothing, the message is not nothing, show the message. And this time I'm just going to put like list at the end of this so you know the second box is the list. So I'll pause for a second here to show you that we're just copying this code bit by bit. We're going to need to fill in right here. Sorting the list, which is just as easy as invoice list dot sort. And then our for each loop again. Only we're not going through invoice totals, we're going through invoice list. And we don't really need to check to see if it's not 0 here. Because previously the reason we did this was because when you initialize your array up here, you have an array of 5 items that's all 0. So we wanted to make sure we weren't showing, when we did this here, we weren't showing those extra things that the user didn't. So if we have an array of 5, if they only enter 2 invoices, the last 3 are still 0. But with a list, we don't have a default value and a set size. So the list is only going to contain items that the user entered. So we don't have to put that condition in there. Okay, we can just take the message plus equals this thing here and pop it in there. So just the message plus equals invoice total, which is part of our for each loop, to string as currency with a new line. And then just give me this one more time at the end here so I know that that ended the list part. Okay, so now when I run this, I'm going to run out of order 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. So my total was 342, 92, and 591. I hit exit, 92, 342, 591, hit OK. It gives it to me again. This is the list, 92, 342, 591. And then it actually exits. So when you look at this, what code is easier? Right here, I'll admit this syntax is quite a bit, but once you have this done, it's done. With an array, first of all, you have to define how big do you want that array, and then you have to maintain this pointer. In theory, and then when you're, so when you're adding things to the array, you have to increment the counter or the index. Using a list, you just say, yep, stick it on the end. Okay? With a list, you're never going to hit this index out of range exception. And in theory, right here, a really good application would create another array that's even bigger, copy all the values in, and then add it to the end of that new array. Okay? So it gets really complicated here. Even our message box code which I can't get it all on this screen, but this is pretty close. Our list is even simpler because we don't have to check to see if an invoice total is empty because there's no default values. The list is only as long as the values in it. So I would say if you're building an application that you think, oh, this requires an array, unless it specifically says you're doing an assignment that says use an array, I would consider using a list. So there you have it. That was 8.1. Zip it up, submit it, and hit subscribe. We'll see you in 8.2.